All right. So what we're going to, so we've discussed what is public forum debate, you know, some of the ins and outs of it. If you are finding yourself going, nope, doesn't make sense, don't worry, it's okay. As Anthony said, we will show you a demonstration. We are also this evening going to do some fun practice debates that are about silly topics. They will probably make you giggle a little bit, which is our hope. And so that you can kind of see the back and forth nature of debate. So if right now seems weird, that's okay. As long as you get, you know, burden of proof, burden of rejoinder, and you have to compare arguments. It's really the most important things to take away. And then also be polite. What we're going to talk about now is Toulmin's model. So if you were here over the winter for one of our winter sessions, or if you were one of my students during the semester, this is going to be review. So testing subtitles. There we go. There, nope. Okay. So this will be review if you were one of my students or here in the fall. If you are brand new, what Toulmin's model is a way to create an argument according to this argument philosopher named Stephen Toulmin. So really quickly, why does my computer, there we go. I received a question, are we debating with another team or just by ourselves? A debate is one team has two people on it. So it is you and a partner versus another person and their partner. And you go back and forth arguing your side to try to convince the judge. So you have someone to help you, and the other team has two people that work together in the debate. And the NTNU version of modified public forum is really focusing on that partnership and that cooperation together. So you are absolutely encouraged to, you know, whisper and talk with your partner and everything. In the framework, so, okay, let's do this. Maybe this will help. Debate is about anything that is controversial, okay? So a framework is just saying, hey, judge, my side thinks this is the most important thing based on our topic. Then the con side will get up and they will say, hey, judge, we think this is the most important thing for our side based on the topic. And then the rest of the debate is spent going back and forth and trying to convince the judge which one really is the most important. And you do that through arguments, which we're going to talk about here in just a second. So hopefully that helps. Framework sounds really hard because it's a big word that you have not heard before. It's a very specific word to debate, but it's a lot easier than it sounds. And so Anthony and I will be showing you examples. We have an evidence packet for you that will kind of help with those things. So we will be coming back to this idea of framework throughout all 3 sessions. Awesome. Okay, Toulmin's model. So the creation of how to persuade someone else or how to create a good argument, that debate has been going on since ancient Greek times and before even that. So Confucius talks about it, Cicero, Quintilian, Plato, Aristotle, a bunch of really old dead people have talked about how do we persuade someone. So Toulmin came along in the 60s and 70s and said, you know, we should update how to make an argument so that it fits more in line with what is going on and what research has said to prove what is the best way to persuade someone. This is by no means the only way to make an argument. Okay, so if you've worked with Charlotte, you might be familiar with the ARE method of argument, reasoning, evidence. And that is one method that works as well. There's Monroe's motivated sequence that you can use, and then Toulmin and countless others. I use Toulmin because from what I have found in my teaching is it is the most effective way for students to quickly understand how an argument, what parts are included in an argument. Oops. So if you look at Toulmin's argument, Toulmin's model, it flows from one thing to the next. And an argument will have always the 4 parts that are in green. Then a rebuttal, and we'll talk about these, will also have all 4 parts. This is, we're going to break each part of these down. What do they mean? How to use them. So we start with a claim. This is 1 sentence long, preferably the shorter the better. We don't want really long sentences. And it must be declarative, meaning it must end in a period. Sometimes you can use an exclamation point, but you cannot ask a question. You must take a stance. The claim will either affirm or agree with, or challenge or disagree with the status quo. Status quo is just a Latin term. All it means is what is currently going on. So for example, you know, the status quo of the noise in my apartment is loud construction next door. Or the status quo of Typhoon Infa is it is off the coast of Taiwan. You know, it can be about anything, weather, politics, you name it. So you're either going to say, yeah, it's loud here, or no, it is not loud here, anything like that. After you've established what you believe is true through your claim, you then have to find what Toulmin calls data. An easier word is evidence. And this is that research that you do. So this is when you are quoting words directly from an author or authors. It's also, research is also known as like the building blocks for an argument. It is the Legos that we put together to create an entire building. It is not, evidence by itself is not an argument. We're going to talk about why that is in a little bit. There are 2 ways in debate. that you can provide evidence. What a lot of American debate teachers and coaches will say is that directly quoting the author or authors is the best way to present evidence, because we're not interpreting their words. We are providing the judge with exactly what our authors said. So direct quotations are considered to be the best. However, sometimes, and I really like to emphasize sometimes, so very little, we will summarize what an author has said. So if we want to use, for example, an entire 20-page article that someone has written, we can't read all of that. We can't even read, half of that. So we might then have to really summarize the entire article instead of reading it. But we always try to use the direct quotations so that we're not accused of misinterpreting or misrepresenting what an author has said. The other part of your data and your evidence is that you must provide an evidence credibility statement. So this is who wrote the research you are referring to. In debate in the United States, it's usually fine to just say the last name of the author and the year of publication. So very good question. And you just answered it. To some degree, when you're summarizing, judges may view that as less credible because it's your interpretation or your summary of what the author is saying. So that is why in the United States, and then myself and Anthony usually say that you want to summarize very, very little and rather read the words directly from the author to ensure that you have the most accurate information you can provide. So it's a great question. You can do it, but you want to be careful about when and how much you do it. So in your speech, you will always, always, always have to say where your evidence comes from. If you do not read a source, if you do not say from Dr. Jones in 2018, you are plagiarizing. You are claiming those words to be yours, even if on the page you have your authors written. This is a great question. What format should we use for the citation? The one I have my debaters use is MLA because it has the most complete information in it. And then we add in the author's qualifications. Anthony is going to show you how to use a really cool program tomorrow that can automatically do debate style citations for you so that you don't even have to really do a bunch of thought work on it. But my rule of thumb is MLA because it is the most complete form because it'll have full names and all of that. You do not have to read the full citation, and you should be used to doing this if you are been competing with NTNU at all in providing the full citation. And the reason we provide a complete citation, just like if you were writing a research paper, is so that if your opponents after a tournament want to go look up your articles, they can easily find your articles and read them. so that, maybe you came up with a brilliant argument and they want to use that somehow, they should be able to access the same research. Or if they need to figure out, how do we respond to that argument in the future? Again, they would want to be able to access your research. So that's a great question. There's each style of debate, each debate circuit, so whoever's organization that runs that form of debate will have its own minimum levels for citations. So just always make sure that whoever you are competing with, whatever organization, that you know what the minimum is for a full citation for them. All right, so types of evidence. There are two main types. They are called primary and they are called secondary. We're gonna go over primary first. Primary research is the best evidence to use because it is coming from someone or a group of people, if there's a group of researchers that directly witnessed something happen. Okay, this is best to use because it has the lowest amount of bias involved. As human beings, no matter what we do, we are always going to have, we're going to be biased about what we're doing some way. Even when we try not to, there's always a little bit in there. So when we are using original research, when we are using, journal articles, anything that is not a review or a summary of something else, then we're introducing the least amount of bias possible. Hopefully, obviously, depending on where you pull your source from. Because if you pull it from like Fox News, obviously it's very biased. But this is the best to use because it is usually the most direct, the most clear, and you don't have to worry about misinterpretation, bad translation, anything like that. So primary evidence is directly from the source that witnessed that event or that that experiment, anything like that, and then wrote about it in some way. Secondary evidence is still acceptable and still good to use when necessary. It's just not as strong as primary. So secondary information or evidence comes from when someone is writing something and summarizing and combining multiple different primary resources. The easiest example is our history textbooks. There is no such thing as a primary source history textbook. That would be impossible because there's no way that one textbook, even if it's focusing on just one event, could look at an entire event by providing you with only primary readings. So history books are, collections and summaries and combinations of primary research, which means that whoever writes that textbook is introducing a little bit of their own bias into it. The best example I have of why you have to be careful is because in the United States, there is a textbook company, or was a textbook company. It may still, not positive if it's still publishing or not. But a few years ago, it was discovered that this textbook, when discussing slavery in the United States, said that the slaves were happy to be slaves and that they enjoyed their times on plantations. And their warrant or evidence for this was that they were singing songs while working. So And angry or sad or upset people don't sing songs. So slavery wasn't that bad. Okay, come on. No. Let's, one, most of the songs were about how to escape the plantation. Two, they were about how to, live through and manage your life in these horrible situations. So secondary evidence can have inaccurate information, and you have to be careful with it. Whether you're using primary or secondary, my biggest piece of advice is what I call the rule of three. You want to find 3 different sources that say approximately or pretty much the exact same thing before you try to use it in a debate round. And you want to make sure that you are finding the most recent information that you can find when using the rule of three. That usually will help find whatever the consensus is at the time on any given subject. Excuse me. So you can use, when you find primary evidence, the best. When you find secondary, be very skeptical of it and very careful using it, but still very necessary for different topics. And then your evidence credibility is very important. Where does your evidence come from? Who published it? And when did they publish it? Okay. Does your evidence come from an opinion piece? Emily, yes, primary evidence can be biased. In the United States, in Russia, in China, all over the world, there are groups or think tanks that exist that have a very specific agenda that they want to see happen. And so they will falsify reports, or they will, create studies to get the exact result they want. So you have to be careful with who you are using. So primary can be biased, secondary can be biased. You just have to be very careful. And that is why evidence credibility matters. So, look for peer-reviewed articles. Not that these are 100% right all the time, but there is a less likelihood that they will be false or inaccurate information. Opinion pieces are sometimes good to use, sometimes not good to use. So if it is an opinion piece about health that is written by a doctor that practices medicine, great opinion piece. You should probably use it if it helps you. Bad opinion piece would be me writing an article about health because I have not studied health. I am not an expert in health. You should not believe me when I tell you, without more research to back me up. So you want to be careful of where you pull your research from. And then you need to look at the 5 W's. Who, what, where, when, why. Who wrote it? What are their credentials? Are they an expert in whatever they're talking about? What are they writing about? Is what they are writing about relevant or connected to your topic? Where was it published? Was it published by Breitbart? Was it published in, the Journal of Scientific Exploration of something? When was it published? The dates matter. especially if we're talking about anything that is changing a lot. So like social media. Social media is not the same today as it was, you know, just 4 or 5 years ago. Since, oh wow, Facebook, I started using Facebook in 2005 or 2006, somewhere in there. It has changed over time. So, you know, when was it published? And Alexander, I'm going to get to your question here in just 1 second. And then the last question you need to ask is, why was this published? And you can usually look in a footnote or in something about the article that will tell you if there was any sponsorship or, you know, by any private companies, or basically the why someone published. This is important because, for example, in the 1970s, ExxonMobil, the oil company, was paying scientists to create experiments that specifically said that carbon emissions and other things did not increase global temperature, that global warming would not happen by burning fossil fuels, right? Because they wanted people to keep buying their gasoline and other products. Obviously, that was a very biased reason to publish those research findings. So you just have to be careful. Alexander asks a great question. Do we have enough time to prepare all the evidence? If you're talking about for the debates that we will have for practice on Friday, Anthony has created an entire packet full of evidence that's already ready to go for you to use. So it'll be ready to go. Every other thing that you do in debate, you will have at least a few weeks, if not months, to prepare. And it just depends on what styles. So I know that NTNU has been having meetings about what their resolutions are going to be for the year. And I know that they're hoping to publish those here in, I believe, the next few months, and send those out to everyone. So, you know, for those, you will have however long before your regionals and then nationals debates are. And then for Fulbright, in the fall, if you want to compete in any of the tournaments with Fulbright, those will all use the resolution we're using today. So you have, you know, from today until the end of the fall semester to prep for those. And then spring will have a different topic. If you are competing in NSDA style, which is American style Fulbright, or not American style Fulbright, it's American style debate that does exist on the island. The public forum resolution specifically changes every couple of months. The policy resolution stays the same for the entire school year once it's announced. So it all just depends on what you're doing. So yeah, I can't answer exactly how long you have, but for NTNU, you have months to prepare, which is really nice. You can, you know, practice reading and all of that good stuff. Also, NTNU, for those that have not done it, provides a study packet for you that will come with some really, really good articles and some articles that are not so good. And they do this specifically so that you can see, or hopefully figure the difference out between what is a good article and what is a not so good article, for while you're preparing, so that you can actually see these things, which I think is really smart of their packets. And I noticed this in their packets this year that some of the articles are awesome, some are eh. And so once you start looking at these articles, hopefully you'll start to be able to see which ones are good ones and which ones are bad and why they're bad. All right. No computer. Oh, we're skipping that. Okay. So the next part of Toulmin, before we move on, will be warrants. What questions do you have about claim or anything to do with evidence? All right, we're going to keep going then. As always, send us your questions or just raise your hand and you can talk. So, warrants. Stars on the page, all capital letters at the very top. Hopefully you will know before, but if there's one thing you leave these workshops with, it's that warrants are the most important part of an argument. No questions asked. If you're used to the ARE method, warrants are the reasoning, okay? Warrants provide that connection between your claim and your evidence. So Toulmin says or believes that you cannot explain something or provide reasoning for something that you have not already provided to your audience. So that's why in Toulmin, you give your claim, what you believe is true, your evidence that agrees with that claim, and then you provide warrants in your own words about why that evidence matters. What does the judge do with this evidence that you have given them? It answers the questions, why, so what, who cares? So as you are creating and researching and starting to write your constructive speeches, when you're using evidence, you should ask yourself, why does this matter? So what? What does this cause to occur, or why is it important? Who cares about this? Is it a large number of people, or is it only like 5 or 6? And you need to be able to explain and defend all of your answers to these questions. You need to also be listening to your opponents to ensure they are providing you warrants. If you don't have a warrant, or if your opponent doesn't have a warrant, they don't have an argument, which means that you should be pointing out to the judge, listen, they don't tell you why any of this matters. My team does. We explain that this evidence matters and this evidence matters because, and then you tell the judge. That's the sign of a complete argument and a good debater. When the debater can look at me and go, the evidence that I read here matters because, or means this, that shows to me that the debater has really done their research and really thought about their argument and is really prepared for the debate. So warrants are really, really, really important. If you can read, you think about it as a paragraph. If you can read your paragraph and still ask yourself, so what? Why? You're not done. You need to keep thinking, keep pushing yourself farther to really get to the end of an argument to find, the absolute most important reason that argument or that evidence and that claim matter. This is the hardest part, okay? This is where I have university debaters who've been debating since middle school or junior high, that it's their 4th year of university debate, and I still look at them and go, so what? Where's your warrant? And they're like, oh. So it's not easy. In my own writing, you know, when people are proofreading and editing my writing, they will occasionally be like, what's your warrant? And I'm like, ah. And I have to think about it even more. So this is going to be a lifelong thing. Don't think that you're ever going to become perfect at it. But it's something that you really, really need to focus on when debating. The last thing that goes into every argument is our qualifiers. I'm going to tell you now, if you try to go read Toulmin or anyone who writes about Toulmin, they use really complicated language. And it took me reading over last summer, no, 2 summers ago, it took me reading multiple books and writings on what is a qualifier to understand, you know, and come to my understanding of it. So my understanding of a qualifier is this. It is on a scale of 0 to 100, how certain are you that your claim is completely true? Okay. So is your claim only a little true? You know, this might be the thing. Or are you nearly certain that your claim is always true? You're going to have a range, and it's going to depend upon what argument you are trying to make of how absolutely certain you are about something. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, why would I tell my judge I'm not right all the time? Wouldn't that help the other team? And the answer is no. Persuasion researchers have found, doing lots of scientific studies that I don't do, but I've read, that when we are honest with our audience about, hey, we know this isn't true for absolutely everyone, but it is true for a large portion, the audience finds us to be more honest, more believable, and is more willing to accept what we say. Meaning in debate, if we're honest that, like, look, this is almost always true, or this is sometimes true, the judge believes us to be more honest and is more willing to accept the arguments that we make than maybe the other team is making. So admitting when not everything is absolutely true helps us to be more persuasive to our judge. So I'm going to put in the chat here a quick argument example. So the claim could be, cats are the best pets for adults. My evidence credibility is vet Charles, I'm making the evidence credibility up, Charles Smith in his 2015 article. My evidence is a direct quote from him that says, cats have been shown to reduce anxiety in their adult owners. My warrant then could be, since cats have been shown to reduce anxiety in adults, they are the best pets for adults that are in need of comfort. Okay, so that should be in the chat. As you can see, I have qualifiers, right? So I'm saying they may not be the best for kids, right? Kids and cats don't always get along. I know that. Plus, my evidence only talks about, you know, adults that owned cats. And so I'm talking at you, right? Like I'm providing these. Yeah, I know there are certain situations where maybe a cat is not a good pet for you. But overall, if you fit into these examples or these frameworks, right? The framework of being an adult and needing comfort, then a cat is best for you. Okay? What questions, and I made up evidence, credibility, and evidence for this example. I don't know if any of that is true. It is purely for practice. What questions do you have about claim through warrant? I'm going to give you a minute to think. You can raise your hand or type. What questions do you have about claim all the way through warrant? Okay, I see some reactions that are showing thumbs up. Good to go. All right. Let me ask you this question. Have I answered, or does my warrant answer, so what, who cares, why? Haha. Okay. So while you're thinking about an answer to my question, I'm going to answer this question. So if we use the words like possibly in our warrant, can that be used as a loophole for attack during crossfire? The answer is yes, and it can protect you, right? So if your opponent came up and was like, well, so are cats the best pets for children? You can be like, well, as my evidence stated, we are talking only about adults. So children do not matter in this debate. But if your opponent says, what do you mean by war only being possible? You're like, well, if all the situations or the scenarios would have to line up to be perfect for war to exist. So we're not saying it's 100% going to happen, but we are saying that there is a risk. And so to avoid that risk, the best choice is to do what we say. Okay. So, and remember that this is what makes you look to, or makes your judge more willing to believe you when you are ready and okay with providing and stating, yeah, I know I'm not 100%, but this is what I think is the best or the most accurate. Okay. Does that answer your question? Okay, let me think of another example. Give me 1 second, Emily. Okay, so let's say we're talking about the rate of obesity being bad, right? So being overweight, extremely overweight. Someone could say that, I don't know what I just opened. Let's see. Someone could say that eating a diet rich in carbohydrates and junk food will most likely cause diabetes. Right? Someone could say that. There'd be a lot of research. The reason we say most likely is because probably there are plenty of examples out there of when, sorry, I clicked a button. There are plenty of examples out there of someone who has eaten, who eats a very rich carbohydrate, very, a diet that's full of junk food, and that person doesn't have diabetes, right? And so they could be like, well, this isn't true of everyone. You're like, I know it's not everyone. I'm saying research has shown that it's most likely, or it is possible to occur, right? So then you're telling your opponent, you have to prove that that's not true at all. Anthony, your box just lit up on my end. Did you have a comment? No? Okay. My internet is doing weird things. Cool, thanks. I just make sure because it looked like you were trying to talk, but maybe you weren't coming through. So that could be another example. The joke for policy style debate is nuclear war will, everything causes nuclear war. So maybe you're saying that if the US increases military support to the island, Taiwan, there is a risk that nuclear war between China and the United States would occur. Therefore, the US should not increase its military support to Taiwan. Right? What is that risk of a nuclear war, or the possibility or plausibility? It's probably very small of it actually happening, but you could say why, the possibility of it happening means that it's the thing that we need to be the most concerned about. Does that help, Emily? My brain's not working enough today to come up with a social media example, unfortunately, at the moment. So does this help with this? Let's see. Yes. Yeah, yes, exactly. Emily, 100%, right? Most likely, smoking is going to cause you to have cancer and all these other things. But yeah, your opponent coming up and being like, well, here's 3 examples of someone who smoked until they were 200 years old and they never had a bad health day ever. Okay, yeah, that doesn't count, right? Sure, you can find the one exception, whatever. No, get out of here. Yes, perfect example. All right. What other questions about claim through qualifier do you have? Cats have been shown to reduce anxiety. However, can the sole statement infer that cats are the best choice for adults since many factors? Let's see. Okay, let me read this again. Okay, yeah. So I said, right, did I go all the way with my warrant? And you pull what, and if I say your name wrong, I'm so sorry. What you're getting at, I think, is that my warrant does not clearly, Paul, awesome. So my warrant does not clearly explain why reducing anxiety, right, makes cats the best pet. I have not gone far enough. So you can, because you can still ask, so what that they reduce anxiety? Why does that matter? So yes, you are pointing out and you're seeing how I have not fully explored what my warrant ought to be or could be to get me all the way back to why cats are the absolute best. Very, very good. So what questions do you have? That's an awesome example of, right, like, because they reduce anxiety, why does that make them the best? What other questions, or who else can see where I maybe didn't go all the way with my warrant, or what is possibly wrong with the example argument I gave in the chat box? Okay, we'll keep going. Again, anytime questions pop up, please ask them. These are amazing questions. So happy. Okay. So claim all the way through rebuttal, or all the way through qualifier. Claim all the way through qualifier. That is making one argument. We do that quite a few times in a debate round, right? Someone said, how many different reasons should we provide in our constructive? And the answer that, you know, I said at least two. So you should do at least two, you know, really big versions of what we just did, is because you need to think of a debate, an argument, as a burning room. Okay, so you're in a room, there's a fire. How many ways do you want out of that room? Just one? No, you want at least two, right? The more options you have, the more arguments you have, the better the chances that you could win the debate, escape the burning room, right? Because if you lose one argument, remember Anthony talked about making choices. If you lose one argument, hopefully one of your other arguments are more important than what your opponents are saying. And so that's why we use arguments. That's why we use warrants, to give us the best possible way to, or chance to win the debate. So a rebuttal is a specific type of argument that is discrediting, disproving, contradicting your opponent or their original argument. Okay. This is where so debate is a game of whenever your opponents say yes, you try to say no. And whenever they say no, you try to say yes. We do that through the using rebuttals. These are not qualifiers, okay? So saying, well, that's only partially true doesn't get you anything. You really want to focus on looking at the complete premise or the complete reason why they are defending, your opponents are defending something, and say that overall thinking is bad or wrong or inaccurate. Okay. You can do this a couple of different ways. Maybe they have bad evidence, and so we should not listen or believe their evidence. You could explain why that is. You can provide an entire counter argument, right? An entire counter argument has a claim all the way through qualifiers and rebuttals, or qualifiers and warrants, all the way through qualifiers and warrants. Or maybe you attack their warrants, kind of like Paul did, where you're like, hey, look, judge, the team never explains to you why reducing anxiety makes these the best pet. You should not believe this to be true, blah, 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 blah. Any combination of these ideas is great, right? Make a counter argument and also attack their warrants or their lack of warrants. That can be, you can do 2, 3, 4, 5 different ways of rebuttaling one argument, and that's really good. Okay. So let's take our example that we had. I'm going to put it back in the chat. I'm going to copy and paste it so it's the most recent for you. Think of a rebuttal argument that has claim, made up evidence, credibility, made up, could be true. Like there might be evidence or research out there that talks about cats and reducing anxiety. And then a warrant for a rebuttal argument. I give you time, and I'd like, let's get a couple to either say them out loud or to type them up in the chat. A rebuttal argument to cats are the best pets for adults. So is there another animal that might be the best pet for adults? What would it be and why? Anything like that, but try to make up a rebuttal counter argument. And then just go ahead and send it through the chat when you're done. Okay, somebody sent me something. I just put an example in there for you. Okay, Edward, yes, dogs are better pets for adults. Now come up with an evidence, credibility, evidence, and then a warrant for why that might be true. Also reduce anxiety in their meaning. Yes. See, okay, so Paul gives a really, really good example in the chat of attacking or rebuttaling my warrants and evidence, right? Where I don't have enough research. Also, he might read other studies that talk about why dogs are better at reducing anxiety. Awesome. Let's see, William, while cats could bring comfort to adults, they also bring a fair share of problems. Yes, so cats can damage furniture, a negative effect on the owner's mood, right? Maybe that will actually increase anxiety rather than decreasing. Very good. Okay, I give you an example of doing a whole rebuttal of claim, evidence, credibility, evidence using horses. Katrina, you sent me an ed credibility statement, but I don't see what it goes to. Ah, I see you now. Okay, so now you need, what could be your evidence be? Let's see, Emily, you're missing a claim, but okay, that's okay. We have Howard Gray in 2015. Dogs reduce anxiety in adults by directly responding to their owners, by helping them do chores, wagging their tail to show excitement, blah, blah, blah. Studies have shown that more people raise a dog, and dogs reduce anxiety in adults by reacting. Yeah. So Emily is a really good one. National Health Journal, Dr. Jennings, 2020, loyalty about dogs. Okay. Mansheng, you are just missing a, oh wait, nope, I just didn't scroll down. Warrant, since most adult work, dogs are the best, okay. Claim. Okay, let's see where William's going. Okay, William, the only reason, so your example of fast food as a threat is not a rebuttal to my argument about cats being the best pets. We're just directly responding to cats are the best pets. Let's see, having a dog around can lead to lower levels of stress for both adults and kids. Decrease risk of asthma. Nope, you're good. I figured that's what you were doing, William, but your first one was really good. And that would work for, anything we were talking about with health. So you're good. So yeah, Katrina, let me read it all in order from her. Said, dogs are the, I gotta go up in the chat here. So dogs are the best pets for adults. From the University of East Anglia. Great. We're just missing a date. Remember, you needed a date. The evidence would be having a dog around can lead to lower levels of stress for both adults and kids. They've been found to decrease the risk of asthma in children and have been linked to lower blood pressure. Yes. Well, there are 2 Williams in this meeting. That's going to be great. We'll figure it out. But Katrina, you're just missing now your warrant, right? Which would be, why is reducing the risk of asthma important and all that? But yeah, you all are getting really, really good on this. So yeah, this is progress. And you'll be doing some practice also after lunch on, the students will be doing practice on how to use and do Toulmin, while the teachers were going to talk about different ways to teach Toulmin. So very good, everyone. Awesome. These videos that I'm skipping through are videos that you have access to watch if you need another, or a different explanation of what, Toulmin's argument model is, or anything like that. So the last thing we're going to go over are fallacies. So a fallacy is a mistaken belief that's based on bad reasoning, or as Oxford Languages has said, a failure in reasoning, which renders an argument invalid. And so a fallacy is any time that you read evidence or you hear an argument and that argument doesn't really quite make sense logically for some reason. And we're going to go over some of the most common in debate. That's a video about common fallacies that we're not going to watch. Okay. So the first one is called a false dilemma. A false dilemma occurs when someone says you can only do this or this, and that is it. One or the other, that's all we got. So President Bush in the early 2000s in the United States was very famous for saying, you are either with us or you are against us, right? There was no room in the middle. That was a false dilemma. So, because, maybe someone is just like, I'm ambivalent. I don't really care what the US does. Maybe it is, you can only have Wendy's or McDonald's. That's it. Why can't I have, French fries from McDonald's and a hamburger from Wendy's or Burger King? So those are false dilemmas. Slippery slopes are when we have something itty bitty, little tiny thing results in a huge, terrible, horrible thing happening. Okay, and it's a slippery slope because it's considered unlikely to occur, and so it's bad, right? Like its qualifier would be, there is a tiny chance this thing could happen. It's like, okay, if we're talking about tiny chance, why are we even worrying about it? The best example I have is that one year when I was debating in the early 2000s in university, my partner and I made an argument that if New York State, just the state of New York, legalized same-sex marriage, there would be a global nuclear war and everyone on the planet would die. We won the round because the other team didn't pretty much just say this argument is a slippery slope and that's bad and you should not believe it, right? So you don't want to make a slippery slope. You don't want to say this little thing is going to impact every single person in the entire world, right? You don't want to do that. Ad hominem or ad hom attacks. This is Latin. It means to the person or to the man. And that is when we are attacking someone for their personality traits or for, their looks or their characteristics, rather than attacking an argument, right? So let's take former President Trump. So if I disagreed with his policy on, anything, an ad hom attack would be, don't listen to Trump. He's a talking Cheeto that looks like a giant baby. And that's all I said. That's an ad hom attack, right? I'm talking just about what he looks like, not what he's saying and what he's arguing or defending. Now I could say we should disagree with Trump's policy on this because research has shown, and then yada, 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 yada. I'm attacking his argument or his justification for something. I'm not attacking him as a human being. So we don't do ad hominem attacks. All comes back to being polite. Hasty generalizations. These happen a lot. A hasty generalization is when the size of my sample that I looked at, so, whatever number of people I looked at, is too small to apply to a larger population. So if you did the non-policy NTNU last year over the English proficiency exams, students, as they were, doing more reading, and started figuring out that a lot of the research that was published about these tests made hasty generalizations because the research tended to only look at one college or one university and, maybe a couple hundred students. That's not enough to say or to create the conclusion that the tests were good or bad, right? Because, 200 students from one university is not a large enough sample and a diverse sample to apply to the entire university student population on the island. So they started finding out that, the research was not the best sometimes, and they had to be very careful. So, looking out for these kinds of things. The next is called a bandwagon. So this is joining something or believing something or doing something just because everyone else is doing it. So in the United States, a popular one example of joining the bandwagon is if there is a baseball or American football team that's suddenly doing really, really well. And a bunch of people will suddenly be fans and support that team. Even though, for a long time, they're like, oh, that team's terrible. Don't root for them, blah, blah, blah. And then the team wins and they're like, oh, I'm so happy. I'm such a fan. It's like, no, you weren't. You're just on the bandwagon because they're winning. Like, once we start losing again, you're going to be gone. You're not going to come to the games. So those are bandwagons. Red herring has a very interesting backstory. So I'm going to give you what the backstory is. Back a long time ago, when it was easier to escape from prisons than it is today, and one of the ways we only had to track prisoners was through using dogs and some things. Prisoners would collect fish and would drop fish or throw fish off of the trail that they took to distract the dogs, because the fish smell, and a red herring is a type of fish, was stronger than the human smell. And so the dog was easily distracted and led astray. Also, farmers, before we had really good control or could build better fencing, would spread fish, usually red herring because it was one of the smelliest, away from things like their chicken coops, so that coyotes and wolves and stuff would not come and eat the livestock, but would eat, the fish scrappings that were left out. Again, as a distraction to something. So a red herring in debate is when you are introducing, or your opponent is introducing, a distraction or an argument that does not matter. So if we're talking about social media and democratic values, a red herring could be, whether social media is good for, my own self perception of my own worth, right? That's not what we're talking about. That's a red herring. And the final one to keep an eye out for are false causes. Sometimes it will be said that correlation does not equal causation. Okay? Correlation does not equal causation. Put that in the chat for you. What that means is that just because two things happen at the same time does not mean that one thing caused something else to occur. Okay? So you have to make sure you are finding the real cause of a problem so that you can actually fix the problem. There are a bunch of websites that exist where people have gone and, compared things that happened at the same time to find silly correlations through history. One of my favorites is someone went and graphed, the average number or the number of deaths from drowning in the, I believe it was in the United States for a number of years. Then they went and they graphed the number of movies that Nicolas Cage starred in. And the more movies Nicolas Cage starred in, the more drownings there were that year. More people died by drowning, the more movies Nicolas Cage made. Okay, let me tell you. Well, funny that kind, they happen at the, they happen together. They trend the same. Nicolas Cage has no effect on the number of people that drown in a year. Okay, it's just correlation. It just happens to exist at the same time. And you would want to point this out, be like, look, this isn't a real cause. Our opponents are not fixing a problem or really delving into and looking at the actual problem that is existing. They're just looking at things that happen at the same time. Believe our arguments are more important because, and then you give reasons. So those are fallacies. What questions do you have? Okay, so is this a false dilemma? Yes, exactly. Okay, so Emily has a really good one. False dilemma. Taiwan can either declare independence or never declare independence. Those are the two options. Well, in reality, they could just stay the status quo, right? And just kind of not do anything. Just keep doing what they're doing. Yes, that is a very good false dilemma. Let's see, another slippery slope. Yeah. So a slippery slope could be if I eat one piece of candy, I will become obese because of too much sugar being in my diet. No, one piece of candy is not going to cause you to develop diabetes and become obese, right? You have to do it a lot. And by a lot, I mean a lot to get there. Or let's see. Why is my brain not working? For another slippery slope example. Do you need another example of slippery slope, or does that help? The obesity and diabetes one from one piece of candy. Really, a slippery slope is anything where you go, really? Yes, I failed this one test. My life is ruined. Nothing good can ever happen again. I will not get into university because of this one test that I failed. Yes, that is a slippery slope. You can fail a test. I failed a few through my, years in school, and I'm fine. Yes, most European countries have it. Have socialized medicine. Therefore, America should have it. Yup, that is a bandwagon. Emily, no. So a slippery slope says something tiny leads to something big. A hasty generalization says just because something is true for a small number of people means it's true for a large number of people. So one is causative, right? That something causes something else, which is slippery slope. And then overgeneralization or hasty generalization is that you looked at a small number of people and now you're applying that to a very large number of people without having enough evidence or enough examples, right? So if I only interviewed 20 people in the United States, who are you going to vote for, in this election? And those 20 people, 18 of them said, candidate A. 20 people is not even, 0.1% of the United States population. So I couldn't, be like, based on my research, candidate A is going to win. I can't do that. I don't have enough people that I've looked at to make that be an accurate statement. Very good examples. Very good questions. Awesome. Does this help, Emily? The difference between the two? Awesome. Okay. What other questions do you have about anything to do with Toulmin? All the way from claim to any fallacies. And there are way more fallacies than this. These are just the most common ones that you're going to see in debate. The ones that you'll come across more often. You'll come across others, but these are the biggest ones. Do you need to use proper nouns in the debate, or if we mention specialized terms to attack the other team, is it good? So you're going to end up hating my response a lot of the time. And Anthony gives the same response a lot of the time too, where it depends on what you're talking about. So sometimes you're going to need be very specific and use very specific terminology, very specific words or proper nouns. And other times where you can be more generic and, broader than specific. And that's just going to depend upon the topic and the research that's being used in that round. So unfortunately, I don't have a solid answer for you there. I'm sorry. Other questions? Yes, Anthony's great. Yeah. You don't have to say, hey, judge, this is a slippery slope, and then go on, right? You can be like, hey, judge, you should not believe this argument because this argument is talking about this tiny thing leading to this huge thing, and that logic doesn't make sense, and just explain it. If you want to say it's a slippery slope and that's bad because, and explain, you can do that. But if you don't have to. Yes, Anthony's absolutely right. You can't just say, this is a slippery slope. Thank you. Right? That's just a claim. You don't have any warrants. You're not pointing out in there, your evidence would be pointing exactly where their evidence or their logic is bad. You're not doing that. So you'd always have to say, this is a slippery slope because this means because. Yes, Paul, yes. So that's exactly what it is. Slippery slope is falsely infer something small causes something big. Hasty generalization is the false inference that a small sample size means it's true for everyone. Yes, very, very good. Anthony, looking at the schedule, technically it says to come back at 1, but that would only be 30 minutes. What do we want to do today for lunch? Do we want, we could,
so it
could
depends. Sorry, go ahead.
Let's say we could go to have lunch, go to 2 and just take a little bit of time with spar debates. Because the groups are smaller this week.
Oh, true. And maybe we can make the Toulmin thing shorter, like the practicing and teaching Toulmin thing shorter, unless you need the whole hour to talk to the teachers.
I can try to make it shorter, but I've condensed it already quite a bit.
Okay. Yeah, if you feel fine about condensing the spar debates, we can come back at 2.
Okay. All right, everybody. We've got smaller groups this week, which means that spar debates aren't going to need a full hour and a half. So we are going to dismiss for lunch. You need to be back on at 1:50 so that we can begin at 2 p.m. So be back on at 1:50. We begin at 2 p.m. You can either stay logged in or you can log out, whatever you want. We'll leave the meeting open, but Anthony and I will disappear to go grab foods. So we will see you all at 1:50. Thank you.